Hello, this is a webinar discussing self-harm. This has been pre-recorded for your convenience by the Emotional Wellbeing team in schools. This webinar will focus on providing relevant information to parents. Your copy of the presentation includes links to the websites where we've got our information. We've been careful to select the most appropriate and accurate information from trusted sources. To begin with, we have included some relevant statistics about self-harm. We found a study from 2016 which suggests that self-injury has recently been shown to be increasing among young people in the UK. In addition to this, information from the Northern Ireland Youth Wellbeing Prevalence Survey from 2020 indicates that 9.4% of 11 to 19-year-olds answered yes to injuring themselves on purpose. Within this same study, self-injury was more common in the 16 to 19-year-old group than the 11 to 15-year-old group. Figure 1 on the right-hand side of this page shows the rates of self-injury and suicidal thoughts or attempts by age and gender. You'll see there that the trend in the graph shows that the prevalence of self-injury and suicidal thoughts or attempts increase with age, and prevalence is higher in females than in males. So this is just to give you an idea of the kinds of things that we'll be covering within this webinar. In the first half, we'll talk about what self-harm is, and then we'll talk about what self-harm looks like. In the second half, we'll talk about where you can get some help and give you some ideas for providing practical support. The practitioners within our team will each chat through a topic listed here. My name is Ellen, and you'll hear from me again at the end of this webinar. Our next speaker is Olivia, who's going to talk you through what self-harm is.
Hi everyone, I am Olivia, and in this section I will talk about what is self-harm. What is self-harm? Self-harm is when someone hurts themselves as a way of dealing with very difficult feelings, painful memories, or overwhelming situations and experiences. Self-harm can include self-injurious behaviour, self-neglect, and engaging in risk-taking behaviours. What are the consequences of self-harm? After self-harming, the person may feel a short-term sense of release, but the cause of the distress is unlikely to have gone away. Many people who harm themselves may also have suicidal thoughts, but most feel there is a difference between suicidal acts and acts of self-harm. People who self-harm are significantly more likely to die by suicide or harm themselves using more serious methods than the general population who do not self-harm. So what should we do about self-harm? Self-harm is an attempt to manage a high level of distress, so should be taken seriously and respected. It is therefore important to work with and support the person to understand their motivations and to not assume the motivations for self-harm are the same every time. We are now going to talk through the self-harm cycle shown by the diagram you can see on the screen. Self-harm usually starts as a way to relieve the build-up of pressure from distressing thoughts and feelings. This might give temporary relief from the emotional pain the person is feeling. It's important to know that this relief is only temporary because the underlying reasons still remain. Soon after, feelings of guilt and shame might follow, which can continue the cycle. Because there may be some temporary relief at the start, self-harm can become someone's normal way of dealing with life's difficulties. This means that it is important to talk to someone as early as possible to get the right support and help. Learning new coping strategies to deal with these difficulties can make it easier to break the cycle of self-harm in the long term.
Hi, I'm Jason. In these next few slides, I will be talking about what factors can increase someone's likelihood of self-harm and how to look for these signs that someone may be self-harming. We know that when people experience distressing situations, it can be difficult to cope with, and that they may turn to self-harm as a way of managing the resulting big emotions. Some of the situations which may lead to this are listed below. They can include experiencing difficulties at home, at school, or having difficult feelings of depression or low self-esteem. Some people are predisposed to an increased chance of self-harming in these circumstances, such as people who have experienced a mental health disorder, been bereaved by suicide, are a part of the LGBTQIA+ community, or who is a child who is not in the care of their parents. Each of the icons beside the text box is a clickable link in your PDF version of this presentation, to an organisation which has more information and signposts to help for each of these potential risk factors. Mind is a UK-wide mental health charity which provides information about a range of mental health topics, while also operating 2 helplines for mental health and any related legal issues which you might need support for. The International Association for Suicide Prevention helps those who have been bereaved by suicide to advocate for suicide awareness with their token icon, the yellow and orange ribbon. This symbolises the light and hope that fire can represent. The Rainbow Project is a Northern Ireland-based charity which runs several projects for the LGBTQIA+ community, including their mental health advocacy service. Finally, VOIPIC is the Northern Ireland charity for children and young people with lived experience in care. They represent the voices and advocate for the rights of these young people, encouraging everyone in this area to get involved. It can be hard to recognise the signs of self-harm in children and teenagers, but as a parent or carer, it's important to trust your instincts if you're worried that something may be wrong. Signs to look out for can include covering up, for example by wearing long sleeves a lot of the time, especially in summer when it may not be a natural item of clothing to choose. Unexplained bruises, cuts, burns or bite marks on their body. Bloodstains on clothing or finding tissues with blood in their room. Becoming withdrawn and spending a lot of time alone in the room. Avoiding friends and family and being at home. Feeling down, low self-esteem or blaming themselves for things. And outbursts of anger or risky behaviour like drinking or taking drugs. Self-harm can take many different forms. Below are some of the most common forms of self-harm in young people. Cutting or scarring the surface of your skin. Disordered eating, for example binge eating or overeating, or a reduction in the amount of food consumed. Punching or hitting objects, which has the potential to harm you, or punching or hitting yourself. Pulling out your hair. Over-exercise, which is seen as about 2 hours of vigorous exercise per day, but can greatly vary between individuals, or taking unsafe substances. These can be a way of managing big emotions, as discussed in previous slides, which may actually be the person trying to attract attention in order to get some help and support. While keeping an eye out for these behaviours in your young person, it's important to keep in mind the intention behind them. If you spot some of these behaviours but are unsure of the intention driving them, it's important to be open with your young person and try to find out how they're doing by simply talking to them. The talking icon on the right of the page contains a link to the Samaritans, outlining some ways to start an open conversation about how somebody is really doing. Social media is a growing concern among health professionals and among parents and carers. Algorithms used on social media platforms, video sharing platforms and websites become more accurate and direct and expose people to targeted information on potentially dangerous subjects. TikTok was found to promote self-harm and eating disorder content to accounts of teenagers as young as 13, the youngest legal age to set up an account. This happened within minutes of any sort of interest being expressed. It's important to keep checking in with your young person to see how they are doing, and since you can never be sure about what they're viewing online, to try to encourage openness and non-judgmental conversations about their mental health. More information on each of the headlines can be found by clicking on each image in your PDF version of the presentation.
Hi, my name is Donna, and in this section we will take a look at some practical support. So what can you do to help? It is important to be aware that you can make a difference in someone's experience of self-harming. These are some practical strategies to note which may help a young person if they are thinking about or are in the process of self-harming. If you are worried about a young person who may be thinking of self-harming, talk to them and check to see if they are okay. As we mentioned earlier, it is very important to realise the intention behind any worrying behaviours. You could also suggest some distraction techniques, which we'll speak a bit more about later. If you think someone is in the process of self-harming, again, talk to them and see if they are okay. In some cases, there may be need for some medical attention or basic first aid. Each of the pictures on this slide are linked to websites with further information on talking to your young person about self-harm, as well as basic first aid. If you think your young person is self-harming, these suggestions may help to keep them safe while carrying out self-harm. This full page is linked to a further web page with information on safe self-harm for you or your young person to read and use. You can also direct your young person to this page and these areas of advice. Damage limitation. Don't mix self-harm with drugs and alcohol. and this includes over-the-counter medication. Get a tetanus jab and booster every 10 years. Only use clean things to cut and never share. If you're feeling overwhelmed, remove yourself from things that you can hurt yourself with and try to be with people. Taking care. Clean cuts gently and put on a dry, clean, non-stick dressing or use steri strips to close the wound. Cool burns with cold water for 30 minutes, then put on an anti-inflammatory cream or dressing. Treat yourself kindly and calmly. Rest and comfort yourself. Danger zone. Get medical help quickly for cuts that are deep or wide, bleeding that spurts or won't stop, burns or scalds bigger than a 50p coin, infection, so areas that are red, hot, swollen or oozing pus, overdoses and poisons. Where possible, help inform young people about the possible impacts of self-harm. For example, what is under the skin? What are the effects of a drug? How does limiting food affect natural processes? In some cases, a young person may need to go to A&E. If they're afraid, suggest that they take a friend or someone who can support them. Tell them they should not feel ashamed or that they're wasting people's time. They still deserve respect when they need support. If you're worried about something your young person has done to themselves and you aren't sure what to do, ask a pharmacist, ring your local GP surgery or A&E. One of the main ways people can help themselves when they want to self-harm is through distraction. Some examples of distractions are holding something warm or cold and focusing on the sensation, curling up under a blanket, stroking a pet, listening to music, watching something engaging or easy, being creative, so drawing or baking, going for a walk or a run, or speaking to someone, or calling a helpline. If you click on the outer box in this slide, it will bring you to a journal from Battle Scars. Battle Scars is a charity that supports those who self-harm as well as those who support those who self-harm. And you can use this journal with your young person. This video is about TIP, which is a skill used in dialectical behavioural therapy and uses 4 simple steps to help calm us down when we feel like we can't cope. It's a great tool to use when you get the urge to self-harm or anytime you're feeling distressed. Make sure your child knows you're there for them and they can talk to you about anything. Take some time to understand what they're going through and why they might want to self-harm. Try to be non-judgmental about the self-harm. It may take some time for things to change. If your child is using self-harm as a coping strategy, this means they're unlikely to stop immediately. So it's important to support your child during their journey, even when things are difficult. These are some conversation starters you could use with your young person. I've noticed you're acting a bit different lately. Is everything okay? I'm not going to force you to talk, but I'm here if you want to. I'm worried about you. Do you want to have a chat? It's important to use clear and direct language so there is no room for confusion or misinterpretation. For example, "Are you hurting yourself?" can be interpreted in various ways. If your child feels okay speaking about their feelings with you, ask a professional to help you create a safety plan. This can be a way for them to let you know how they want you to help when they feel an urge to self-harm. It's also a good chance to talk about safety measures and getting medical help. The speech bubbles on this slide are linked to Mind's website where you'll find tips on how to speak to someone about self-harm.
Hi, I'm Sinead, and now we will look at where you can get help and support. This will include ways to support and look after yourself, as well as taking a look at some of the fantastic organisations out there. We'll start by looking at ways to look after yourself. Supporting a young person who is self-harming, especially when you love them so much, is extremely difficult and can be emotionally exhausting. It's hard to know what to do. It might seem selfish to focus on helping yourself, but this is really, really important. Think about the safety instructions on a plane. You are asked to put your own oxygen mask on first before you attend to your children. Put simply, if you run out of oxygen, you won't be able to help anyone else. So do take time to check in on yourself. Here are some tips to help mind yourself. Share how you feel. Try to find someone you can be honest with about your feelings without judgment. Try to be realistic. If you take too much on, you may feel as if you never achieve anything. Try to get a clear idea about what you can do. You can't give your all as a carer, you just can't. You have to save a bit of yourself just for you. Find ways to stay organised. Staying organised can help you feel more in control. You could keep a schedule or planner of your daily routine. Support their independence. It's important to help your young person have some control over their care. You may find this means taking a step back or supporting decisions that are not what you would do. Find positives in your relationship. Looking after someone can change your relationship with them. Sometimes you may feel close and connected, but at other times you may feel angry and irritated. It can help to talk openly and honestly to find ways of coping together. Take a break and make time for yourself. Try and take a break, especially if you're worried about your own mental health. You may not be able to take a break whenever you need one, but it's important to have some time that's yours. Look after your physical health. It's important to try and make time to look after your physical health as best you can. Eating healthy, a little bit of physical activity, can really help to clear your head. Try to get enough sleep, as a lack of sleep can make it harder to cope with everyday challenges. It can also make stress and depression worse. When you spend a lot of your time focusing on someone else, you may feel as if you have no time for yourself. But looking after your own well-being is important for you and for them. Even trying one small thing might help you feel more able to cope. If you click on more info in your PDF copy of this presentation, you will access the article from Mind where we access this information. On the left-hand side, you can see some organisations that can provide support and useful information for you. On the right-hand side, you can see some organisations that provide support for your young person. On your copy of this presentation, you can click each of these organisations and you will automatically be directed to the website. Find Help NI will direct you to a list of local support services. The Family Support Hub exists to link families with early intervention support services such as counselling, family support and parenting support. Papyrus is a charity aiming to reduce the number of young people who take their own lives. NSPCC directs you to an article about how to support your young person who is self-harming. BEAT is an eating disorder charity. Child in Mind directs you to podcasts and information to help support and understand your young person. Young Minds brings you to helpful information about self-harm. Battle Scars started out as a peer support group created and led by people who self-harm. Support for your young person to the right-hand side includes some of the same organisations, but the links here will direct you to more targeted support for your young person. Lifeline is Northern Ireland's crisis response helpline. The Here to Help app provides quick access to advice and support services for anyone in crisis and needing help. It contains details of local, not-for-profit organisations who can help with many issues. Calm Harm is an award-winning app funded by teenage mental health charity STEM4 to help manage the urge to self-harm. It was developed by a clinical psychologist. Illumina is a free, online 7-week course for young people struggling with self-harm. Each course has up to 14 young people, all accessing the sessions from their own phones, tablets or laptops across the UK. Childline can be contacted about anything. Whatever the worry, it's better out than in. There are lots of different ways to speak to a Childline counsellor or get support from other young people.
So here we have our feedback form, which is what we're using to collect data about all of the material that we deliver across the emotional wellbeing team in schools. If you wouldn't mind taking a minute to scan the QR code or by clicking on the link on this page, both of which will take you to the evaluation form itself and answering a few short questions about this webinar, we'd be really grateful. Thank you so much for listening to our webinar. We really hope you enjoyed it. On our last screen here, you'll see a list of contact numbers that you might wish to use if yourself or someone you know is ever in any immediate risk of danger or in crisis. Thank you so much.